I don't trust the cloud. So hello everyone, and welcome to session 1 of Pathways Development's series on energy and managing your energy through until the end of term. Tonight we're going to be very much focusing on energy and our environment, so how we relate with our environment, but also the influence that our environment has on us as well. I'll just talk you through the series really briefly, but before that, just to introduce Pathways and what it is that we are and what we do. So there's 4 arms to the organisation. One is around the education arm. We run a school to re-engage young people with additional needs back into education. We then have a Pathways Enterprise, which is a group of colleges looking at running social enterprise through our college curriculum, but into coffee shops, and then repurposing the profit from that coffee shop to seed fund social enterprises to address the 95% of young people with additional needs who do not find employment. And then Pathways Development is very much around how do we create the awareness in our leaders within our own organisation, but also nationally and internationally, as I'm joining you from France today. How are we able to really shape the education system by ensuring that our leaders have enough energy for that journey, and to be open to that kind of change that our constantly changing environment brings, as we'll go into tonight. And then we have Coffee at Pathways as well, which is very much around this cooperative network of supply chains and how we can actually create online and physical businesses for our young people to supply their products and really give them a guaranteed market, and therefore a foot up into the economy as we move forward. So a really interesting organisation and run by absolutely fantastic leaders, and we consider all of our staff to be leaders, so that includes the whole team. And we're delighted to be able to officially announce tonight that we have just got good in our first Ofsted of the school, just over a year from opening the doors. So we're absolutely delighted with the progress that we've made over the last year as well. So a big shout out to Nazia Galib and her team at Pathways as well. Just a special mention for them. So this is the course. We have built in 5 sessions on energy and played on the E of energy. And the area we're starting with tonight is environment. So what is that external part that influences us? We're going to then dive into emotion next week, and we've got Dave Hughes from Complete Coaching coming on to speak on that one. And that's very much around that internal version. And then in between that, we sit between this sort of interaction between the internal and the external. And so we're going to be having a session on eating and exercise, and therefore how does the external environment affect our eating and exercise, but also what's our internal interpretation of that, and how do we make the decisions that we make to actually make those decisions, preferably in a healthier and more energetically driven way. And then we're going to dive into essence. So essentially our purpose. What is it? Who are our true selves? And how do we begin to define and explore who our true selves actually are? And we mentioned in the introduction session 2 weeks ago that we are often conditioned by lots of experiences throughout our life. And part of the work that we do within our coaching is actually coming back to that true essence of self. So who are we truly underneath all of those layers of our environment? And that's obviously what we'll be exploring, some of those layers this evening. And then this embodiment. And the reason that embodiment is so important is because we can be aware of many, many things, but unless we actually choose to change and choose to embody that change, then we tend not to see any progress. And the coaching session after this will very much include that, around how do we actually embody change and move forward. And the reason that that's on a triangle is around this idea of homeostasis in our body, and how do we keep that balance. And that's one of those things that makes us so resistant to change, is that it's a threat to how balanced our body is. So by creating the space for yourself tonight, hopefully this is an opportunity for you to down tools, really focus on yourself, but most importantly, be really present and be able to just find that sense of balance in yourself. And whether that's just listening to me or not, or muting me, but how do you find that balance for your own self? And that's the real key to how we move forward, as the individuals, but also as a collective as well. So that's the series. Just a couple of key descriptors to just ensure that language. I will use intrinsic a lot and extrinsic a lot, largely because I'm conditioned by 10 years of studying it with my doctorate. So just to understand that intrinsic is that inner and internal self, the extrinsic is the outer and the external. The essence is the intrinsic inner nature or essential quality of something, which will be you. And the embodiment aspect is that tangible, visible form of an idea, quality, or a feeling, and then how it is actually lived rather than spoken about. Okay, so why are we running this series? Well, we're seeing the sort of the impact, sort of almost the whiplash of COVID, really. Dissatisfaction is rising steeply, with 70% of leaders not recommending school leadership as a career goal. Then the huge pressure that the last 2 years has caused, as well as the system that we work in, is seeing that general lack of professional recognition and trust really expand and be exposed, and people are asking themselves some really big questions, and therefore we're seeing that attrition rate really be affected. Lots of staff leaving the profession, not just leaders, and then that full-time equivalent number of leavers going from 36,000 and the increase of 4,000 since 2020. And the main finding is that occupational well-being of our respondents is low or moderate at best. And when we consider that we work in the type of job that we do, under the type of stress that we face and the responsibility that we take on, it's really key that we address that. And being well means being well on a really deep level, not just on that surface level. So apologies, I'm just going to mute a few people there. I've just logged on, sorry. So, okay. So yes, and then coming back again, the number of heads that have left within 5 years is rising. We don't want to see these numbers going in that direction. We want it to go the other way around. 35% of middle leaders and 38% of assistant and deputy heads that have needed access to mental health or wellbeing support. So interestingly, we have a really interesting debate around mental health and emotional maturity. And actually, a lot of the time we see mental health issues as a result of a lack of emotional maturity, because of course we get into these negative emotional habits that lead to mental health issues further down the line. But we feel that there's a lot of early intervention with understanding emotions, and we'll touch on that in next week's sessions on emotional development. And then employees who feel their voice is heard, 4.6 times more likely to feel empowered to perform to work their best. So are you feeling valued yourself? Are you aware of your essence? Does it align with your job role? Does it align with your organization or even your profession? So beginning to sort of question some of those things, but obviously trying to do that in a way in which we're provoking educators and leaders to think about employees really feeding into what their true strengths are and how can we adapt our systems to accommodate them. And then looking obviously at the engagement that comes as a result of that, and 37% lower absenteeism levels and 21% higher productivity. And if we consider the number of staff that are currently out at the moment, I would guarantee you that anyone would love 37% less absenteeism in their setting. Okay, so we're going to dive into the environment this evening. And our energy flows between us. So those external layers we interact with and can be conditioned by. So as we touched on in the introduction week, what are those things outside of us shaping the way that we choose to interpret everything that is going on outside of us? So that first one is often the most obvious and key aspect to that is people. How do other people shape our energy? We certainly know which people we would like to be around and which ones we might like less to be around at this point. So how do we become more conscious of how it is that we work with those people, where we gain our energy from, but also with those people who might perhaps challenge us at times, ask ourselves, why are they challenging us? And that's our perception of how we see them as well. So we're not talking about a blame game here, but a sense of accountability. So how can we take accountability for the way that others, we perceive others to irritate us or annoy us or frustrate us? So how can we begin to have some of that understanding? And then the systems, of course. So there's aspects of the systems that we work in within education that are going to frustrate us as well. But again, we are the ones in control of ourselves. It's that internal aspect that we can control. So what is the influence externally that we can have on that system? And so instead of waiting for the system to change, how do we actually change the system ourselves and take accountability for doing that? And in taking accountability, it really taps into some of that motivation, intrinsic motivation, for saying, actually, this is mine. I'm accountable for this, whether it's this classroom, this student, this school, this district. How can I actually create that to have a sense of ownership in myself as well? And then the physical experience. So, how does the environment that you're set up in look to benefit your energy or not? How does it also drain your energy when you're in certain conditions, lighting, sound, in a noisy street? All of these things are having different impacts on us. And when we think about those sensory filters, where is it that actually we get our most energy from? And all of these things are just key questions to keep asking yourself as you begin to sort of design where your best space can be. How can you find a space that actually really works for you to bring that energy back? And then that digital experience. And again, as we touched on in the introduction week, the huge overload of digital information that is coming at us, the intention behind it. So obviously, the more attention that can actually be gained from us, the longer we stay on social media, for example, is a real energy drain. It's just a tiny touch over boredom of how much energy it actually takes from us in engaging in digital experiences. But that little dopamine hit that makes it very, very addictive. And again, this applies to our young people as much as it does to ourselves. But all of these things, as we'll see, really create these early stage beliefs, values, identities, and fears. So how do people create fears within us? Well, we don't want to let people down, or we feel that this is the expectation in our society or in our smaller tribe, whether that's our family or our group of social peers. Same with the system, outstanding is outstanding. We must get to that point. Or you can also be fearful of other judgments that come through, whether that's performance management or your day-to-day culture within your organization. So again, how we can really considering where our fears are coming from. Same with the physical experience, of course. We can associate different places with very different energy states. If you put me out in a grass field with a ball, I will have an infinite amount of energy. If you ask me to sit in a dimly lit office and focus on a very small screen, I would not have nearly as much energy in the same way. And again, with that digital experience, we're certainly seeing that with things like fake news and clickbait, because right at the center of our body's development and our mind's development is the amygdala, and it's there to be triggered. How is it triggering those fears? Because what that does is get that instant response. How are we being constantly caught to be attentive to something by what is going on around us? And if we're not conscious and we don't have that awareness of all of those triggers, then we can't do anything about it. So the first step is to really have an awareness of what it is that is really causing the energy to flow in. And is it positive energy or is it negative energy? So I'll just give you a minute or so just to really sit with yourself and observe your surroundings. Ask yourself what you really get from those surroundings. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it somewhere in between? But also, where else could you go where you could really find that source of energy that you need to? Could that be listening to a podcast on the train on the way home? Is that going for that walk? Been recently introduced to slow walking. And when you walk more slowly, you have a greater awareness of everything going on around you, but also that sense of appreciation for everything that you do see. So really enjoyed that. And where else do you also feel appreciated? So which people are you around that you really feel a sense of value and worth with? Also, we'll go on to the internal aspect of yourself and your own energy over the next few weeks, but what kind of energy are you bringing back to those people? What kind of energy are you bringing back to those systems? What kind of energy are you bringing to the physical and digital worlds that you interact with? And just looking at some of those early stage beliefs and values and identities. This is me. I'm Matt the presenter, or I'm Matt the tech guy. Therefore, the expectations that I place upon myself. How do they generate fears? So I'm just going to pause there and ask if anyone really wants to just reflect briefly in the middle, and we'll edit this bit out of the recording and I can pause. Okay, so changing how we relate with our environment really does come down to creating that awareness. And that starts with stepping back. If we're constantly caught on this hamster wheel, going round and round, then we're constantly striving for that next thing to do on our to-do list. And it means that we are going to burn ourselves out. We are in a constant loop. How do we step back and look at some of those parts of our past, aspects of our future, but most importantly, our current self, that awareness of our current self, where we're at, what state we're in, what is influencing us from the outside, and how we're responding to that. And if we don't create that space, we remain very, very reactive to our environment in that sense. And we don't have any control in shaping that. So it really comes down again to our own accountability and how do we begin to step back and do that. And then observing, and that's observing the external, but also the internal aspect of that. And what is actually our intent of that observation? So when we're doing that, are we looking for fear, in which case we're still in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, or are we looking for safety and calm and more peaceful settings, or very stimulating settings that's going to lift us back up? So what is it that we actually need? Where do we need to consider what each environment really brings to us? And again, when we're talking about the external aspects of things, it doesn't mean that other people necessarily have the awareness of their intent. So why might some people be doing things that frustrate or annoy us? Do they know? Do they even know that it frustrates and annoys us? So again, how do we increase that awareness by observing where others might be coming from and whether it's a conscious or unconscious thing? And then finding space behind our conditioned view. So when we think about our conditioned view, it's actually, what is the space behind that? When are we conscious that everything that we're presenting and we're seeing and we perceive to be ourselves and our identity and our ego, are we conscious that there's a space behind that internally to also be able to see that conditioned view and just observe it, not judge it, just observe it. And there's a real difference of when you change from that judging of yourself to just observing and just being curious about it instead. How do we become curious about the way in which we see that external environment? And then, as we said in session 4, we'll be having a look at our essence and therefore others. So again, what's other people's true purpose? Are they truly meant to be in the role that they're in? And as a result, are they truly giving off a really positive energy back to you? So again, exploring our own essence so that we can understand others, because we might also really clash. Some people might really want to be this one type of person, and other people might want to be this other type of person. But again, if the awareness and the conversation, and you can't actually have the literacy to explain what your true self is and why it is that you love doing what you do, then you can't really be blaming the external environment for not picking up on where it is that you want to go. So that really comes down to a lot of that goal setting, and we'll look at that again in the session after this, but also in the embodiment session in week 5. And then having the maps and how we understand how we actually take our next step. Where are we going with that next step, and what does that look like? And again, this is part of the program, is understanding those maps of development. So how do we begin to mature emotionally? How do we begin to interact with our external environment with a new maturity to that? And then becoming more present with yourself. And that's the real key for all of this. And you've stopped for half an hour, an hour, if you're staying on for the follow-up session. You're creating some space to stop and be curious. And that is presence. You know, it is not an overly spiritual state that we're looking for here. We're simply looking for the space between the stimulation coming in from your environment. The processing of that is then that presence before you choose how it is that you respond or don't respond. But that's that real key. How are you becoming more present with yourself? How are you becoming more aware and more curious? And I can, from experience, tell you that that observation is making you a far more effective and positive energy to be around in yourself. You know, how do you really create that presence? And if your mind drifts and you feel like you're not present, it's really key that we don't give ourselves a hard time. The fact that you've even noticed and stopped to explore is the very first step on your road to awareness. So really, you know, appreciate the value of yourself, and how do you become aware of what it is that's going on outside, and as we move through the series, what's going on inside. So we're constantly going to be coming back to this presence. So yeah, just to really reiterate in that sense, that when we're talking about energy, we're really on this journey of discovery, this pathway of discovery. It's really not about shaming. So we can feel shame from a lot of external sources. As we're conditioned and we grow up, we have some really damaging experiences of people doubting us, or being rude or even abusive towards us in various forms. We all have our own baggage from our own experiences of this, whether that's family or friends or colleagues. I say friends lightly, but really on this journey, and when you work with Pathways, the key here is it's around discovery and not shame. How do we remove that shame? Because shame is a spiral, and if we're not aware of ourselves and our shaming of that, we can't reverse that spiral. You know, so how do we really become conscious of not shaming ourselves? And how do we become conscious of the fact that other people in that external environment or the system and their prior conditioning themselves may be projecting shame onto you, whereas actually that comes from their own experiences and a lack of awareness about themselves, or a lack of awareness about how the system can actually best work with the people inside of it. So really playing that conversation back to your external environment. Why is it that this energy is coming from you, and having that curiosity in itself as well. So a curiosity for yourself, but also an awareness that everyone has gone through their own journey too. So how are people presenting to you? So that's a slightly shorter session tonight. We had the introduction part at the beginning, but we're going to move on to the coaching session now, and we'll stop recording for that. Okay, so